We are September 2nd, 2022. We are at the University of Victoria in Cleriou building, and I, Ellen Kaz, I am with Juliana, Bermudez-Valderrama, Allie, MacIlroy, Larissa Harder, Rebecca Meitz, and Sage Dunn-Krahn for an event entitled Showing and Looking at Female Genital Parts, Political and Gender Performances, ? And I would like to start by acknowledging with respect that the University of Victoria is established on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking people. I also want to acknowledge and respect the Saanich, Esquimalt, and Songhees people who maintain close relationships with this land. And I apologize for having said in the wrong order the names of these peoples. I was at loss to find the proper sentence. This event is a showcase for recent research by bright and studious research assistants for the project Perfecta, the perfection of the female body, 1618, that has become 1621st. And we'll go around this table with presentations, very short presentations and questions, starting with the Middle Ages, Rebecca Meitz, then early modern, Sage Dunn-Krahn, then, we start with Allie MacIlroy telling us about her masters. Oh my gosh. 2 minutes. So Roman manhood, then Middle Ages, Rebecca Meitz, then early modern, Sage Dunn-Krahn, then Larissa Harder, 21st century, and Juliana Bermudez-Valderrama, 21st century, last week. So I mean, that's the most recent material that we have. So the way I'll do that is that I'll leave the camera to whomever is presenting, and we'll start with Allie, if you wish.
All right. Thank you, Ellen. I do not have slides prepared, or I'm really just doing this on the fly today, but I am excited to tell you about some research that I was doing for my master's thesis that I just defended. So the title of it was On the Margins of Manhood, and I was examining physical gender atypicality among men in Roman Imperial society. So basically, I was looking at men who were classified in Roman legal texts as men, but in these legal texts, the jurists presented almost this hierarchy of virility. And we start at the top with virile citizen Roman men who, their rights weren't in question or anything. But then after that, you can see the juristic tradition having to grapple with men's bodies who, I guess in multiple ways, couldn't perform like the reproductive function properly. So next in their hierarchy, they looked at men who they referred to as spadones, which is a Latin word for eunuch, but an uncastrated eunuch, which is complicated, but essentially infertile men who are in some way infertile, their genitalia were intact, or this could actually even include men who had undescended testicles as well. But for all intents and purposes, they were uncastrated. That was the very important part. So the jurists kind of debated, what rights should these men have? And they actually thought they're good to go. Next in their hierarchy were men they referred to as hermaphroditi, so whom we might refer to as people with intersex variations. But when you look at Latin literature, Greco-Roman literature, it's actually quite complicated what this term could be referring to, the types of bodies. There's actually quite a spectrum of known intersex births and people who underwent what was thought of as spontaneous sex changes, but yes, we have some intersections with our research. But yeah, quite a complicated term. But to the jurists, they had to essentially pass as men in some way. Very, very euphemistic kind of language they use. So it's fascinating. And kind of last in their hierarchy, men who should have had rights, but the jurists personally, individually, and kind of as a collective, culturally, thought they shouldn't, were castrati, castrated men. So again, Roman law didn't actually bar them from their citizen rights if they were, of course, citizens, but these individual jurists based on large overarching cultural discrimination. On a case-by-case basis, kind of just thought they shouldn't have rights. So essentially in my thesis, I kind of dive into all the nuances of this terminology that the jurists are using, this hierarchy, which wasn't universal. They kind of just had to clearly grapple with real human bodies and kind of confront that in the context of Roman ideologies about what made a man, which, virility, right? Ideologically, but in reality, everybody has different bodies, but you can kind of see them struggle to still classify people within the gender binary, right? It's like that knee-jerk kind of need to do that. I think I should probably stop there. That is like my quick and dirty of my thesis. Yeah, thank you. All right.
No, thank you so much.
Thanks. Oh, I can, yeah.
No,
Yeah.
Stay there.
Okay.
Do you have questions? Allie? I have
quick.
one.
Yes.
So this is a perfect event, and you perfectly at your place. Why?
And pardon? Sorry.
And you belong.
Oh.
Perfectly.
Oh.
So why?
Why?
Because we are not talking about female bodies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, in my thesis, I actually do kind of talk about, I kind of start with medical conceptions of the gendered body. And I do talk a lot about discourse on female bodies and kind of setting it up as, what an ideal Roman man shouldn't be physically, right? There was a lot of, this isn't me, by the way, this is the language being used in these texts. But a lot of the language that I look at in the Greek and Latin texts that I examined use the language of femininity, and a lot of the language that was kind of imposed on female bodies, such as like softness, weakness, malleability, permeability, etc. And to describe men who were considered effeminate or infertile in some way even, there was a lot of discriminatory language, in this very misogynistic society, applied to these men, using that kind of feminine physical language. So I do, like, my research really, really intersects with, a lot of, I'm sure, language and imagery that you all have been looking at as well. Also, I definitely have spent a lot of time with Pliny the Elder's natural history, which was, I spent a lot of time with Pliny.
No, but it's beautiful. So,
yes.
I thought the one on the difference of sexes, where the female doesn't look like anything, but the male does expose all the potential of the form of the animal, and that you found it.
Yeah.
So, and we could say it about the genitals as well. The female doesn't look like she has anything, but the male shows what she would have. I mean, the female body would have been if it had been finished.
Yes. Yeah. And then you add sex change narratives onto that, and it's a whole other story with that too, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I have a question.
Yes.
Is there any kind of hierarchy for women?
Ooh, that's a good question. Honestly, I would say yes and no, let's say. So overarchingly, no, but when you kind of do have to look outside of medicine for a lot of this discourse on, gender atypical bodies, but there's a lot and exclusively spontaneous sex change narratives throughout Greco-Roman literature that are exclusively female to male as well. So these bodies, obviously, a lot of the time this kind of topoi that kind of turns up, these tropes, are a woman at this very important liminal stage in her life, like a young woman of marriageable age on the eve of her wedding, something like that. All of a sudden, like male genitalia appears, like just wow, like that is, and a lot of them use, very vague language, like, but we do have some sources that go into quite a lot of detail, surprising detail. So these bodies are kind of seen as like on the brink of crisis, right? Like it definitely follows that ideology of, the feminine body as being, very susceptible to external change, like external factors, or just like there's a lot of language of like feminine bodies embodying pollution and stuff like that too. So like, like anything can happen basically, right? So, there are obviously like women whose bodies don't exhibit any kind of atypicality, and then these people featured in these narratives, these accounts, that their bodies suddenly transform in some way, and then you can see a lot of external factors are brought in, like men have to come in and correct these bodies somehow, or their marriages need to be broken up, and it's a civic problem too. So I would say there's a hierarchy in that way that I've explored. Yeah, very like normative quote unquote bodies, and then the ones susceptible to spontaneous change.
I would say that it didn't matter so much for women because they had no rights.
Yeah,
so
truly.
No quibble. Can they be leaders of family? No, that's it.
Yeah.
So whichever. So the question was, if they became men, these men, could they be leaders of the family?
Yes. Yeah.
So that was the only question. But before the stage of being a man, they don't exist. So that's my first remark. The second thing is, when you talk about liminal stages in life, first that relates very much to what Sage is looking at. But also, it's not that simple all the time.
No.
So what happens in several cases that we have in early modern times is that the woman is happily married to a man. They don't have children, but they are happily married. Then suddenly the woman becomes a public man. For instance, she has an accident, a physician comes. That's a man. So we have a narrative, which is, when I fell, suddenly I had something coming down from my matrix, and I was a man. Okay, so these
that's the way it goes. Yeah.
So I'm very sorry, what's happening there? And these narratives have been interpreted now as cases of homosexual common life that was masqueraded as so they were pretenses. And my last remark is, you say excruciating details in describing intersex bodies. It was even worse in the 17th century. They started to call classes of art students so that they could go and do the detailed descriptions. They took plaster moldings of, and that goes up until late in the 20th century. So when we go to the museums of history of medicine, and that's now an ethical problem, we do have collections of genital moldings of intersex bodies.
Yeah, it's an extreme voyeurism. You see that a little bit kind of emerging slowly in Roman imperial history, but yeah, nowhere to that extent. So obviously, like throughout and starting again, 1700s, is that just accelerates.
And fairs shown as monsters.
Yeah.
The Barnum Circus had 2 intersex bodies on show. So that brings, and that's not, I think, in Roman times.
No, not to that extent.
Brings to the question, the poignancy of the social status of the people who had these bodies and wanted to show them publicly. So that was just a note. I think that it's maybe one of the best, the most important parts of your masters, when you demonstrate that deviance from a norm, whichever norm it is extremely painful in whichever society we are sitting. So for a long time, to be female was already a deviance. So that was deviant, that was incomplete and so on. But there are all kinds of ways of being deviant. And I thank you for sharing with all of us what you've done for 2-3 years.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, closer to 3. It's been a while.
These masters, and I was thinking, why hasn't she done a PhD?
I've been here for a while.
Okay.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
So, Rebecca, I'm going to share my screen.
That's fine. All that's up there is my title, and I'm sure I can remember to say that. So, yeah, everything else that you mean showing. Okay. Hi, I'm Rebecca, as Hélène has very nicely introduced. And the project that I was working on this term is called Structures and Performances of Virginity in Medieval and Early Modern Medical Texts. I was working on 3 different textbooks that date from 13th to 17th century Europe. And in particular, I was looking at how medicine influenced the performance of virginity within this time period. And so there were a couple of different definitions of virginity that they're using within these textbooks. The first being a medical definition, which is the state a woman is in when she hasn't yet had sex, that's characterized by certain physical traits, like, for example, the hymen or tightness or bleeding upon first intercourse. And then there's also a social definition that they use, which is a state of purity where a woman has not yet had sexual experiences that would result in her being understood as like morally corrupted or ruined in some way. And also important to my understanding of these texts was Judith Butler's theory of gender performativity, and she defines performance as the acts in which a person partakes in order to display themselves as a member of a certain gender. And so of the performance of virginity, we have sort of like a main character through these texts, which is, of course, the virgin. And this is a girl who occupies a certain social role in her society. So she's around marriageable age. Legally speaking, she's owned by the head of her family, which would typically be a father or a brother, but generally a man. And she fits both the medical and social definition of virginity, but she also is displaying a couple of personality traits like being modest, shy, or submissive. So these texts have a couple of different performances that they discuss within them, the first being the test of virginity. And so this is a medical test that's performed typically by a medical professional, so like a midwife or a doctor, where they're testing to determine whether or not the girl is still a virgin. So through this, they might be doing something like a hymen check or a urine test. And her role in this performance is really one of passivity. So her job is to just simply submit to the performance itself. And through that submission, she's showing how there's power held over her body by somebody else and showing how she is expected to submit to that power that's held typically by the person who would be enforcing that testing, who would be like the head of her family in this case. And also during this performance, there's sort of a metaphorical loss of her virginity happening because in this performance, there's a public viewing of her body. And once this happens, she can no longer really be considered morally pure or not morally corrupted. And so through the testing process, she sort of loses her virginity in the social sense. And then we have the wedding night, which is a performance where she loses her virginity to her husband. And again, this is a sort of passive form of a performance where she's not really doing anything, and instead her job is to simply be like obedient and submissive to her husband and display those personality traits. And also through this performance, she's expected to prove that she was a virgin in a certain sense, which might be something like signs like bleeding or the breaking of the hymen, pain, that type of thing.
And then we have the faking of virginity, which is sort of a way in which a woman might display certain personality traits or fake certain physical traits that would make her be understood as a virgin for one of the other performances, even if she's had previous sexual experiences. And so while this performance is technically by choice, it's heavily influenced by the fear of like a negative outcome were she to be determined not to be a virgin through one of the other performances. So then there are a couple of different themes that I found throughout these texts. The first being the performance of virginity itself, which kind of can't see all of the section, but hopefully I'll explain it well enough. So basically through this, you can see that virginity might have been defined as a lack of sexual experience, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that was what it was at that period of time. So a better way to define virginity might be that she's able to participate in the performance itself, because we can see that faking virginity was possible at this point in time, and you could fake the physical and personality traits that were expected of you and still be considered a virgin. So really what virginity is it's based off of the ability to perform in the expected way for the performance rather than any previous sexual experiences that somebody might have. And then we have the commodification of virginity. So through these performances, we see the girl submit to somebody, like to outside ownership of her body, whether that be to her husband or to her father. And through this submission, she shows certain traits like obedience that give her value as a wife and as sort of a form of commodity to be like traded within her society. And then we have the naturalization of virginity through medicine. And so through these texts, medicine has sort of constructed certain physical standards to display virginity as something that exists within the natural world. And when they do this and display it as something that exists in nature, they effectively justify all of the things that go along with virginity, like the commodification of women's bodies, the outside ownership that's held, and all of those standards that women are expected to submit to, and all of the like personality traits that they're expected to perform within these different performances. And because they've done such a good job of justifying, in a sense, virginity, it sort of has become entrenched in society to the point where a lot of these standards are still present to this day, even though things might be medically disproved or like just not hold as much value today in society, but they still exist.
Let me congratulate you on behalf of all. That's absolutely magistral, that's rigorous, that's fascinating. And your idea of taking the fake as a part of the performance is so excellent.
Thank you.
So yes, really exemplary. So I'm sure that you have questions. Well, I know that Juliana has a question because we were talking about that around 2 o'clock this afternoon. And she was telling me about a meme.
I don't remember.
Remember, the meme about, I think it was a comic actor talking about virginity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. In Mimi or something like it was about a woman who said that she has anal sex or oral sex. She maintained her virginity. So I only have this commentary, no more about that. But yes, technically, she's virgin.
Yeah, I think the lines around virginity are really, really blurry. So particularly like in today's society, when you're looking at not just heterosexual sex, of course, like nobody really knows where to put the line of like, what is a virgin, what is not. So the only way to really say like, yes, I'm a virgin or no, I'm not a virgin is to decide that yourself. So, but there's a lot of people who have written some really interesting books about like how to define virginity in like modern days. But if you were to take that person and put them in society at this point in time, medically speaking, they might not be considered a virgin, but socially speaking, or medically speaking, they would be considered a virgin, but socially speaking, absolutely not. Yeah.
To me, what is really interesting is this idea that, well, this hymen, the idea that there is a membrane which is perforated with the first penetration, and so we can look at it. Well, it's very recent in writing, so it's obviously a folk myth, a legend, but it hadn't made the written text to the written text for a long time, and it appears at the end of the Middle Ages in the Western world, a little earlier in Persian and Arabic medicine. But it defines the virgin's body not as a female body exactly. It's a complete body. It's enclosed, and then so that's why virgins smell nice. They smell like roses. I'm quoting. And then with the membrane and the image of the perforation, their body becomes a leaking body, oozing bad smells, humors, discharges, and so on. And so that's the body of the pollution and of the corruption. And so they change immediately. So even a very serious physician, I'm thinking of Dulaurence and also Laurent Joubert, who have the same take on that. At the end of the 16th century, they have dissected women and young women, and they say, there is no such thing as a membrane I could see. And whatever the midwives and the surgeons say, they make it up. But they both say, but when I look at a woman, I can know by the way she holds herself whether she's a virgin or not. And he can even say at the minute it happens. And that's very interesting. And that's what you show, because it's a performance. It's also a performance on the part of the father, the parents, the husband, the priest, the doctors, the midwives. And that's a general play.
Yeah.
And I wonder, but I don't have an answer, and I don't ask you a question to be answered here, but I wonder what is at stake with the play. What do we want to produce? So you say commodification. I wonder if we don't want to produce the idea that there is a perfect femininity, which is childish. And whether it's not a way of even polarizing more the binary divide of roles. And I think that you're right to say that it's persistent. And that's very interesting. I'm absolutely sure that everyone knows that there is no such membrane, seal of consumption. No, that doesn't happen. But still, I'm absolutely sure that parents are talking about the virginity of their daughters, not their sons, but daughters, and that it's a very gendered construction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, Allie.
Yeah, I had a little, I'm curious about more context just on the test. Like, so when this occurred, like this very like public, like very medical kind of procedure, that's like extreme high stakes, because like you said, it's like a metaphorical loss of virginity, and it's also a very social one too, right? So was this really was this mostly done for women who there was a huge concern, like maybe right before marriage, like there were rumors or something, or yeah, so it wasn't super duper common, I would assume?
I mean, it's hard to say whether it was super common or not, but the instances that I've come across and seen have typically been like when there's some type of legal question about her virginity, or like, I don't know, the one that comes to mind is like Joan of Arc. There's a lot of talk about the testing that like she went through to check if she was still a virgin. So I feel like probably a lot of the time it was more like if it's in doubt. Yeah.
If I may, there were several procedures, so some were really invasive. If you have the midwives, well, if you were virgins according to their definition, you're not after the checked. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's it. But there were some procedures where the girl was still dressed, and that includes peeing straight or sideways, or sitting on a fumigation pot, which was, so you have a bowl full of braise, burning coals. Okay, so, and you put some special wood on that, some special herbs. The girl has drunk some special wine at a special time. Okay, then she sits on that, and so you have vapor coming and the smoke coming out of this pot, and there is a little thing so that you can sit, and your vagina is empty. So it's like that, and the vagina is in the exhaust away of the smoke. Okay, so now, if she is a virgin, the smoke won't come out. But if she is not, it's going to come out from the nose and the ears. Okay, so fine. That's a smart. That would have been my favorite one. If I had needed to be tested. But this one is not so invasive. Or she drinks something, she pees, so she stands up, and she has to pee on the fire. There was always fire and pee together. And so if she pees straight, that means that she's not a virgin. But if she pees just sideways, she's a virgin. So I would say that the midwives were the most invasive ones. And they were the ones caught by the justice enforcers. So who is asking? We have some answers in literature. Future husbands, future fathers-in-law, parents who want to sell their daughter. So basically, that's not the agency of the girl, but always her entourage. And then they are, the cases I know are, a girl is pregnant and she swears that she's never been with a man. Okay, so test says she's a virgin. I don't know how she does that. Okay, so is that a miracle? Is that pathology? What has happened? And so we have many of these, and usually the girl is better with the fake than the physician. So the fake, they call that in Latin the sophistication. So they say these women, they're very smart, and they do this, that, and that, and in the, maybe not in yours, because yours are written for general public, but in the books written for physicians, you have chapters. Beware, these women, they will do this, that, and that to cheat. I find it's a wonderful topic, and really I like you fake thing very much, because that's smart. In Egypt right now, and Egypt has many millions of inhabitants. if you are raped and you're crazy enough to wish to complain about that, there is a virginity check by the police before they take you. Guess what? Women do not complain. So there is no. So when I learned that, I was so proud. And you're right, it's a demonstration, it's a performance of honor.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm really interested in, like, you said that basically, you know, like, it doesn't really matter which is as one of those essentially to perform virginity, and then also at the same time, this certain there's this theory that, like, you can see if someone's a virgin by looking. So those kind of seem like almost like two opposing forces. I don't know if that's a correct way to characterize it, but
Can you repeat the question for the recording?
Sorry, I'm trying to wrap my head around it.
well, just like that, there's kind of like an abstraction. it seems
Yeah.
like from the actual reality happening, and at the same time, they're like also saying, oh, but there's actually like physical reality that we can see here. And I was wondering, like, are those two things happening at the same time, and are they happening at the same time?
Yeah, so I mean, the performance of virginity, they didn't really understand it that way, right? Like they would say, like, oh yes, if you can perform virginity, then you are a virgin, obviously. But like that wasn't necessarily always the case. So that idea about like being able to see whether somebody's a virgin definitely did exist. And like in these texts, it shows up, and in the performances, it shows up as one of the ways that they might tell that somebody's a virgin or not. But a lot of the times, the things that they're expecting to see are certain things that you might be able to display without actually having to worry about like whether or not you've previously had sex. Like a lot of them might be certain personality traits, like the way that somebody walks or the way that they interact with men. Like that type of thing might show up in the text. And I feel like those are pretty easy to like fake in some sense, because if you know that that's what's expected of you, you can still perform in that way whether or not you've had sex. So I think really like they didn't understand it as a performance, but we can look back and see it now. But to answer your question, yes, I think that they were definitely like happening at the same time.
I'm very, very pleased and grateful that Sage Dunn-Krahn is coming to this mini conference. We would have had more mini conferences if there hadn't been any pandemic anywhere. So that's wonderful. Sage, the stage is yours. Be careful there.
Hi everybody, I'm Sage, and I'm going to be presenting about my honors undergraduate thesis, supervised by Ellen, of course, which is called Seeing a Ditch He Wanted to Cross Over at Borders and Gender in the Story of Marie Germain. And that's kind of just the working title. I'm still in progress, so I'm not going to be try to be too ambitious with this presentation. I'm just going to present the text, talk a little bit about my approach to its analysis, and give some historical context. So, first of all, a content warning for misogyny, transphobia, and genital mutilation. Sorry about that. No, Ellen. Is particularly.
To me, it's unbearable, but that's Perfecta.
So the text that I'm working with is the story of Marie Germain, who is a girl who jumps over a ditch and, quote, having leaped. At that very moment, the genitalia and the male rod came to be developed in him, having ruptured the ligaments, which previously they had been enclosed and locked in. And I give the full quote there because it's kind of ambiguous as to what actually happens, but basically she jumps over a ditch, and on the other side of the ditch, she discovers that like she has a penis now.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
I'll go back to Zoom. Yeah. And I'll bring you
there so that you can see your own text.
Yay.
Here. Okay.
Yeah, so Marie returns to his house, is examined by physicians and surgeon, and is found to be a man and no longer a girl. And he is then brought to the bishop, receives the man's name Germain, and is given men's clothing. This story comes from Ambroise Paré's book, Monsters and Marvels, which was first published in 1573. And Ambroise Paré is a surgeon and is actually the king of France's surgeon. The book presents reports of these so-called marvels, which include intersex people, people born with more than the ordinary number of limbs, and creatures like this guy who I think is so cute.
Yeah.
Look at him. But these marvels and monsters are presented as reports, and in the story of Marie Germain, Paré gives precise details of location. He references real people like the Cardinal of Lenoncourt, and he says that he saw this person, Marie Germain, with his own eyes. So we can see that he's taking pains to legitimize these stories. And Paré also includes with the story an explanation of what happens, drawing on Galenic theories in which the women's internal organs are an inverse of the man's external ones, and that it's the heat of the man's body which creates the force to push out the genitalia. And he also adds, drawing on Aristotle, that, quote, nature tends towards what is most perfect and not on the contrary to perform in such a way that what is perfect should become imperfect. So as you were saying, only one direction, only women to men, not the other way around. So in this way, he solidifies the ditch jumping as like a one-way street. And this is sort of like a rationalization of the story, perhaps to convince those who would disbelieve it that there's a theoretical basis for such a thing to occur. And of course, he's drawing on the authority of Galen and Aristotle. Oh, I'm not going to talk about this. So my study of this text focuses on reading the ditch as a border and how and why the ditch functions as a space where sex transformation occurs. And I'm using queer theory and border studies, but I'm also situating it historically. So I'll talk a little bit about the historical context of the story, which I hope will give an idea as to why borders are kind of a pressing issue for the people in this time and place. The basics are, it was in Vitry-le-François, which is there, and it's in the mid to late 1500s, as I said. The story is published in 1573. And at this time, as you can see, oh, I don't know if this map is going to work. No, it's not. Okay, but
No, but
if it
she's
works,
right. She was right. I'm going to show you something. So this map works very well.
yeah, it's supposed to be moving around. It's supposed to be like showing you that like the borders are constantly changing during this time, and you know, Germany over here is kind of like encroaching. France comes back. It's very messy. So basically, the consolidation of France as a state is meaning not only that the borders are changing a lot, but also that the borders are taking on a different meaning than they had before. And Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, has been crowned King of Germany, Italy, and Spain by 1556. So he's taken over like this whole area. He's just surrounding France. And in 1555, this village called Vitry-en-Perthois is completely burned to the ground and rebuilt as Vitry-le-François. And that's where the jump happens. So,
So do you understand that this little village was called Vitry-en-Perthois? It was destroyed. Then same place rebuilt as Vitry-le-François, and François is the name of the King of France who rebuilt it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just wanted to emphasize what you're saying.
yeah. So like it's not just that it's named after him, but it's also like Francois, like it's French. Like they're reclaiming it. It's like very like it's a French place now. So And also, oh yeah, so the town is also divided by the wars of religion, and its population is both Catholic and Protestant. And so its politics, the politics of this specific town is like very characterized by this divide between the population. And so you can kind of see why borders and questions of self and other would be paramount in this specific location. At the same time, sexual panic is taking place in France. Images and texts of intersex people and other non-conforming people are proliferating. And this panic is directly tied into the consolidation of the nation, which sort of posits itself as built on a version of the family unit, of which the king is the masculine head. And we start to see some very odd and interesting discourse about generation, masculinity, and the right to rule. And we see a lot of political attacks on Henri III, which are often gendered, painting Henri as an intersex person, as effeminate, and as bisexual. And Pare's Monsters and Marvels is sort of a part of this phenomenon, and this is the context in which his text and his story about Marie Germaine emerges. So what my research is focusing on in this story is the ditch that Marie jumps over, reading that as a border and looking at how border crossing and sexual transformation are linked in this story. So some conclusions that I've drawn about the connections between borders and sex are that sex is conceptualized in Pare's text as two sides with a border in between. The crossing of the border is possible, but it's characterized as a transgression, as out of the ordinary and as a marvel. The existence of this text speaks to a fear of border crossing and an attempt to categorize and contextualize and sort of, what's the word? Like contain within the medical discourse. However, the text is nevertheless a border crossing narrative, and I think that speaks to the ambiguity or the paradoxical nature of borders within this period. Which are, as this quote says, both it was obsessed with crossing borders, created borders, it tore up borders, they were feared and also like fascinated, the early modern people. And yeah, content warning for this next part, illustrations. So despite the ambiguity surrounding borders, there's this fear of border crossing also has some very real consequences in the real world and presents itself in the medical practices and literature where sex is ruthlessly bounded and women with clitorises that are deemed too long are surgically altered, as we can see in this image from the storehouse published in the 17th century showing the method and tools for this operation. And that's the end of that. And finally, very briefly, no. Come back. Just want to move this. There we go. I just wanted to gesture towards the way in that this research is applicable to our current political landscape, in which borders figure very heavily in gender discourse, specifically trans discourse, in which, you know, these borders of what is a woman, what is a man are becoming blurred. That creates a panic. There's a lot of medical gatekeeping. And then there's also a lot of discussion about spaces and who can enter spaces, what kind of bodies can enter spaces, such as bathrooms and other things like that. And that's the end of my presentation. So thank you for listening.
I'm very, very much moved. This is so excellent. Everything you've done, you know, young women and sick working very courageously on tackling difficult questions about performances, about identity, about genders, and also about the role that you give in many societies. And you do that really with rigorousness and documentation, perspicacity. can I say this? Because
I don't know.
you
if it
seem
is, but maybe.
but you look through. And I'm amazed at your analysis of the ditch. Sage is the first one to have remarked that it happens. Where, on this village, which is rebuilt and undone, rebaptized, and it's called the French. So François, that's the name of the king, but that also means French. And this person is presented even before she crossed the ditch. And that's a key. That's very interesting, but the name is very French because Marie is for a woman and Germain is for a man. But that would be a surname, a family name. Well, but it wasn't clear at this time what names were. But Germain means also German, from Germany. So we are in a story which is full of signs that do not fit what the story tells. And I really admire the way you find some meaning in these things. I'm sure you have questions because that's an amazing story.
I don't really, it's not totally a question, but no, this is fascinating. This is giving me lots to think about. It just got me thinking about how, just the concept of the border, especially in a climate like this, which is so complicated and ever changing, like religiously and with the land and everything. But just how important conceptualizing borders are when you're kind of in this framework of like thinking about the politics of like how people forge otherness, like a sense of otherness, and impose a sense of otherness onto specific people and bodies and experiences, right? Like this is just a fascinating, like very, very rich thing to think with, like a piece of imagery to think with. That can be applied, I'm sure, if I kind of want to go back and look at like Greco-Roman narratives and see if they play with like that kind of imagery as well. This is, I just want to say like, that's so exciting. You got me excited about this.
I think I first was thinking about sort of like gender and borders together because I took a class with Aaron DeVore, and we were talking about like the difficulty for trans people to cross borders and how when you're crossing a border, they have those like things that spin around you and like take a 3D image of you when you're trying to get on a plane or something. And like, if you're trans, then you'll automatically just be like, they'll be like, no, you can't cross this because you have a weird body, basically. You might be hiding guns. Yeah.
This is unconstitutional.
Yeah. They'll be like, oh, like, because you look like, if you look like a man and you don't, they can't see a penis, they'll be like, that's weird, we gotta like check you out, like pat you down. Or if you look like a woman, you have a penis, then they're like, oh, is that a gun, etc., that kind of thing. So I was thinking about border crossings and gender in that way, and then decided to apply it to this.
Wow. And I wanted on the same topic to say that when Luther started Reformation in France, when everywhere in Europe it was a religious and a bloody war, in France we had peace because this King François was tolerant of questioning. So there was an Erasmian movement called the Evangelique. Even strictly speaking, they were actually Protestants, but they didn't want to separate from the church. They wanted everyone to be together and so on. And for a long time it worked. So they were in between. They were neither Catholic nor Protestants or Lutherans or Calvinists. And then after the 1547, at the death of François, you have to take your stance. You cannot be both or neither. You need to be one. And that's when the craftsmen of Paris, who were in their majority Protestants, glasses makers, printers, watchmakers, I mean, all these smart people who were reading the Bible and so were closer to Luther than to the Pope, left for Switzerland, Netherlands. And think, where are watches made now? Where are glasses made now? Switzerland, Netherlands. So, but that's interesting because that's the same polarization that we see. And I believe that in the Middle Ages, there was a way of being the non-common body in a village. Okay, may have been difficult to get married, but other than that, it wasn't a big deal. And in medieval texts, we do have so-called hermaphrodites who are friends with the hero and so on. Doesn't matter. But at the end of the 16th century, that's a big anxiety because they don't never. And you show that very well. And you show also very well how Paré is both building a narrative which is like a fortress. This cardinal was there, and that's a cardinal. So I'm a good Catholic. Remember that. Okay, so we have that. Many people can attest that I said the truth. I have proofs of what everything I'm saying, and at the same time you can hear the panic. Don't worry, that happens. That's natural. We have it under control. and that's very interesting. Perfect. This is wonderful. I do have questions.
I'm curious, is there any like information in the text on how that person would have been like treated in their society after this? Like, were they accepted as a man? Or
Yes, they were. They just lived as a man. And he apparently grew a beard. He had a red beard. I don't know what that signifies, but
the name of the pirate of the time is Redbeard, Barbarossa.
right.
Okay, so
Basically, as soon as he has this new name, he's been like examined by these surgeons and physicians, and like the church is like, okay, yeah, you're good. Then it seems like he's good. So yeah, I think that yeah, I don't know, it's interesting.
you have to know that in the 14th century, a woman masquerading as a man was elected pope. And she's called Jeanne, Papes Jeanne. And well, I mean, for a long time she was a pope, then she was unmasked.
Gave birth right in the street.
And the Curia assembled was inspired by the Holy Spirit and made the decision, which is still in effect, that when a pope is elected, he has to sit on a polo chair. And someone goes, puts the hand under the chair, touches and says, so he says in Latin, has balls. But that shows also, so that was a story that was widely circulated among the Protestants. And the Protestants were the ones to attack with the sword. And they were saying that basically the Catholics were all effeminates and they didn't know that they blurred all boundaries. They were wearing robes, they elected a woman, and so on. But that's a very interesting way of looking at the anxiety. How can we be sure? Is this identity stable? And so that's, I think that you have a wonderful topic. And that was a very good question. This is very difficult to step in there, because it's not part of the official history. When you study Well, you've studied this field, except that you have rational feelings. But you know, there is so much to know about the context that these liminal cases are often just not said, not told about. But they are extremely important, even if they are quantitatively limited, because they tell us about the self-portraits, the self-image of a society. So they are much more important to me than whatever story on the king is circulating. Thank you again.
Thank you.
So that's Larissa.
Thank you. Well, as Lynn said, I'm here from my text program and searching for the project Political Dimensions of Female Public Nudity. I found a project that the artist makes a lot of desserts with female parts sculpted in it, and I find it amazing. I really like it for the first view. And then talking with her, she told me more things, and then came the idea from this poster. And that she says that she wants to talk about the consumption, the patriarch and media consumption of female body. And also in the side she has about the project, she says that she likes to think about the duality of things. So I think the dualities, what I see is that here is a dessert to eat, but it is also a female body part that's not to eat. So you say, I'm gonna eat it, or I'm not gonna eat it, but also you think how much of female body you eat from media, you eat from society, how much you eat from it. And then I found in the encyclopedia, Cultural Encyclopedia of Breast, that the breast is the most exposed female body part. And that's it. Now she makes you think about all of this consumption. And then I bring the female organization that you can think that it's the opposite, because they use the female body to say, no, it's not yours. It's not for you to eat. It's for you to think. It's for us to manifest our thoughts, our political ideas. But in some point, they fight for the same thing. They fight against patriarch. They fight against media. They try to make us think about our perfect imperfections, because everybody is one body and nobody is the same. Nobody is equal. And I haven't talked about my title because I don't know if there is this tradition in every part of the world, but in Brazil, the first slide of your birthday cake goes to the most special and important person for you. So I think that's the point. Your body, your first slice of cake is not for patriarch and media, it's for ourselves. And that's it.
No, thank you so much, Larissa. And I found that the idea of having the cake and eating the cake at the same time.
Yeah.
And also the title of the pies in the window and so on also alludes to what it is to eat the cake. And maybe Rebecca and Allie and Sage will know that better, but to me, if it had no breasts, this cake would be the foundation layer of wedding cake. White, full of sugar, full of layers. And it's also a way, I think, of compounding all these. Well, I think that there was a photograph like this, wasn't it? This. So she's making the cakes, but she's making photographs.
Mhm.
And I find that here, the breast is looking at the viewer on the photograph. Do you want your cake? Do you want to eat that? Do you want to suck on that? And I find that this is a very powerful provocation to the viewer. Do you eat that? So I was very much surprised when you told me that because I was wondering, so these cakes, first, are they real cakes or is that plaster? And second, if they are real cakes with sugar and so on, is someone eating them? And if so, who? And Larissa, do you want to say what she answered?
Yeah, I asked her, and literally in real life, it's her family that eat it. It's not a big dessert. It's I think it's like this, not big, but it's her family. She told that the ones that was not so much manipulated to take the photos, they yeah. But with the eyes, everybody, all society, it's.
But that's interesting that she gives that to her family.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Because, and I feel that if you do again this presentation, you should keep the photographs intact because they are beautiful. So without putting texts, because this one is dynamic and really with the two.
Yeah, but I didn't cut the photograph. The text is just.
But yeah, but the text is above it, so you don't have this effect. And maybe you could have a background which is brown or sugar, so that we see where the photographs are, because the framing is important. And here the framing with the two plants it comes to the viewer. And whereas in these ones, you have something which is face and only one character behind that's the background. And that's not art. That's something different.
Yeah.
I'm sure that you have questions for Larissa.
I don't know. The artwork of Michael.
I don't know how to say
that. The Michael. What is? It's only because I don't know. This artwork is only the cake, or is the photo of the cake, or is the action to eat the cake?
I don't think it's the act of literally eat with your mouth. I think it is to eat with the eyes. She sells these photographs of the.
Okay, the artist is the photograph.
Yeah.
Okay.
Unfortunately, she don't sell the pie.
Yes, because I think maybe the art is the performance to eating the cake.
Yeah.
And the other work is about the images like this. For this reason is my question, because the work of her or his is about the photograph of the performances or the performances itself. Because in this way, in the first photograph, is like in a side where women exhibit her bodies. But yes, I don't know if her work is about the performances in the places or on the photographs.
Normally female, all these photos is in manifestations
Oh.
about something.
Only
The
their cost.
yeah.
Okay.
But usually they are in action.
Yeah.
So they are seized by security guards
Yeah.
and so on. So these are very special in the feminine connection. So
Yeah.
because they pose for that. So and they pose in front of the sex shop. So that's
But the second is in interior.
but still that's posing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You had a question.
I have a question, but it's kind of, I'm not sure.
Okay, I realized that I should stop the recording and do it again.
Okay.
Because otherwise I won't be able to convert it. And I leave the stage to Juliana Bermudez-Valderrama for a presentation, self-publishing of self-images. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, my name is Juliana Bermudez, and I'm a graphic designer and a student in plastic arts and museology in Universidad Nacional de Colombia, and I have and I'm too. My task is a research internship like Larissa, and okay. When reviewing the archive material that research group has, we decided to focus on those images that women had generated of their own bodies and had circulated in what is known as ephemeral material like posters, flyers, manuals, and so on. To do this, I reviewed and consulted information from the catalogs and archive materials themselves, offered by 5 archives in Colombia on self-publishing science since the 1980s. And thus, it was possible to obtain 20 titles of bibliographic material that the women themselves manage and circulate in their territories, both in the main cities and in rural areas, so exchange between groups and sales in bookstores. For this research, I focus on 3 publications that were very relevant in America, and unlike the 20 publications that I mentioned, those books were financed by large institutions in the United States, but the image information that contain part of the organized work of the feminists. The 3 titles I refer to are Our Bodies, Ourselves from 1976, and its Spanish version, Nuestros Cuerpos, Nuestras Vidas, from 2000, and A New View of a Woman's Bodies from 1981. Of the images that those publications have, I have pointed out 3 groups that from their visual construction make an indication to see the female body differently. First, in this part, the recreation of the illustration of medical anatomy, books visualizing and describing the importance of the clitoris, which although medically recognized as early the 16th century, this organ has been intentionally ignorant in some of the medical books. Second, the self-image in the mirror. The visual confidence that they put in it when seeing themselves, and the mirror as a tool, like an extension, not only to see oneself, because if we see it in the mirror then it is true, but also to touch oneself. And finally, the third is the introduction of rural, indigenous, Black woman, among others who appears alone touching each other and appear in a group, being enough to take care of themselves. Susan Gage, the illustrator of the book New View of Women's Bodies, pointed out in an interview in 2009 that to construct the illustration, she used not only the traditional literature material of anatomy books, but also her experience working as a nurse and assistant in a group workshop of self-care, where very different women participate, and that this should be projected. There were networks that made large and small editorial productions possible were made up of female writers, cartoonists, poets, printers, who produced and put into circulation images hitherto non-existent outside the academic books on medicine and art history, images that were mostly produced by men and that focus on the study and illustration of the female genitalia in relation of pregnancy. As Maria Cecilia Trujillo, one of the members who produced Brujas, a magazine in Antioquia, Colombia, told me they had to do everything parallel to the other tasks they had in their daily lives. Making this post takes a lot of time and effort, but they did it because they knew that what they called self-awareness is important. Feminists, they try to popularize the teaching of how to do a self-examination with a speculum, mirror, and light as a strategy for women to know their genitals and thereby promote spaces of self-care and self-knowledge that will later allow women themselves find the pleasure on their bodies. This is all. This was.
Many thanks, Juliana. I think that you established the political dimension of the gaze on female bodies, and that it's political. You talk about the pleasure, of course, and that's private, but we start with the alternative images, with art which is public, because you can see it, and it's distributed. And we also can find this type of images online galleries, blogs, and so on. And what is shown is not so much the body part itself, than the fact of looking at the body part. And that's political. So that's an extraordinary work. And I don't know how you found so much in 3 months, but you did, which is just wonderful. I knew about the mirrors, had no references, and that's an amazing work. Good for you. Would you say that it's second wave feminism? Beyond the dates do fit.
In one part say that when the feminist group start to defend in hard way the right to know and respect the love and genitals. This is one part, and the other to provide the woman the knowledge to treat their illnesses in the genital area without the necessity a medical care. No, it is in this moment when the feminist groups create self-care groups that and workshops that was groups of women to teach the others about their genitalia with a mirror, and how and consider it to give a diary, no, with drawing or something like that, because the normal is only normal for you, is not a ruler for all of us. So only you know, or only you can know what is normal in your body, and then you can establish how to resolve the problem in your own body. And this is this project of the workshop starts in the second wave.
Yes, thank you.
But the publication, all of this, is since the 70s, the first.
Our bodies ourselves.
Yes.
Was it republished often?
No. Well,
Oh yeah.
what is the question? Sorry.
Was it reprinted and
yes, many times and in many languages. Is around the world, and that one thing that I review, that the publication is not only a work of traduction, no, it's not only to translate the words, because the contexts are different, and this is an editorial work that the woman did. Is not only a problem of the words. Is for this reason the images of the groups, for example, in the Spanish version, is the Latin American groups, because it's different. And we found that the version in other countries are obviously had different images, because one of the more important things is the visualized creation, that the woman that not necessarily be artists or designers and something like that, because some of them don't work like a nursery, no, have to create the images, because it's necessary to create the self-images for the work.
What do you call self-image?
Self-image in we have two moments, because one moment is when you create when you see the image in the mirror. This is your first image. But the other, and maybe most important in this case, is when you publish it, and you put this image about not necessarily your own body, no, but we talk about like a woman body, but no, the woman body by woman bodies, by woman groups. Yeah.
Thank you. I think it's really the crucial point, that it's not what it looks like to someone else, it's to the self, and the self is sharing with the group. And so that's a complicated status for these images. And they are practically everywhere now. And they are always in context of pride for the body, tolerance for the body. So I'm thinking of the website of Sex Ed Plus, or a thing called, I think, the Vagina Gallery, the Vulva Gallery. And so you have the little medallions like that, it's online, showing genital parts that you can see by looking in between your. So we don't see from afar, we don't see penises. But then when you look carefully, you see that there are huge variations between these bodies. And there are bodies which would be called intersex, others that look very feminine, others that are not identifiable for us. So, and that's very interesting. So these are not photographs, these are drawings done by the people who are looking at the mirror, or who have they have the transparency over the mirror, and they draw what they see on the mirror, through what they see through. And I was really interested. So there are hundreds of these images. Who is doing that? Are they doing that together? Who started that? And this is collective, and this is political at the start. So the idea is everyone is contributing to the gallery at the same time, and everything is put in the gallery. And that's important too. So this self-gaze is never judgmental. There is no exclusion. So I asked a stupid question, and I know it was stupid. But I had to make sure that I had understood. So I said, well, could a self-identified male post a picture of his body? And the person in charge was appalled by the stupidity of the question. So they told me, well, if you're talking about self-identified males, they don't go to vulva galleries. And I'm not so sure about that. Okay, so, but I understand that I should have worded my questions. And I said, well, do you align all these diverse self-gazes to show that there is no normative definition of the vulva? Which looked better to me. And he said, whatever. And this, whatever, that was it. And I was, okay, but I think that my first question was very bad. And I also have to tell you that I'm traumatized by my first experience of going online to find the vulva gallery, taking pictures, putting everything in Zotero and so on, what you can imagine, and forgetting to put incognito on the browser. And gosh, so it was years ago, I still received pornographic sales and disgusting advertising, really. So I understand that it is an unsafe place to boosting the vulva gallery. And but at some point, I'm not going to apologize for asking a stupid question. But sex ed was much better. And sex ed plus. And you know, that's the beautiful pictures, black and white. I'm sure I showed you that. You'll see it. This is Montreal, essentially. No, I don't want Montreal, I want sex ed plus. Okay. No. Okay. Be that. Yes. I should, oh, sorry, I should record, oh no, it was recorded. No, I should share the screen. So Sex Ed Plus proposes images and proposes images of the body, but also of all kinds of bodies and of all possible
bodies. So that's Magali Pirot. You should actually go and listen to what she says. And in Perfecta is publishing, I'm going to show you what we are publishing by Dunn, is publishing a series of photographs which actually illustrate the so I'm going to make that much bigger. And these are presented on their websites as works of art, but also with the name of the person who accepted to be not only photographed, but photoshopped from the, and I find that it's really important. So there are possible images of diversity. The mirror is, I think, the first tool for that. The signature is also a tool for this belonging, you know, acknowledging that this is my body. This is how I want to be seen and how I see myself. And sometimes it's my body. This is not how I want to be seen. And I don't recognize myself in my body, and it's extremely hurtful. So these questions are, I think, emblematized with the study of Juliana on the mirror. Who am I? And, you know, mirror, mirror, who is the fairest? Mirror, mirror, who am I? I'm my best. Okay. So thank you so much, Juliana, for your work. Thank you, everyone, for this wonderful conference. I'm going to turn that there so that we keep memories of. Okay, so we have, yeah, the three of you. It's so difficult. Yeah. And then here, yeah, and it's been absolutely wonderful to spend a summer, and at least one summer, with you, working and exploring and learning. And I hope that you were not too much at loss, because basically I told you, well, try, go for it. What do you see? What do you feel? And that's part also of what I believe is research, what we did just now. And we learned so much just now from each other. Even if we don't work on the same texts, whatever, this is research when we are together and we are sharing. I know that there was a guy who said, when three of you are together and say my name, I'm there with you. But I feel that research is when three of us are together and we are talking about what we are trying to understand or explore. So thank you so much. And good for you. Good for you.